receiving that email. But you will be able to access all of the webinar through that. All right. I am so excited to introduce to you Beth Murphy, producer, director, and founder of Principal Pictures. She has directed, produced, and written nearly 20 documentary films. She has a master's in international relations and international communications from Boston University, and she studied documentary filmmaking at the George Washington University Documentary Center. And she will, I'm sure, say more about her background and experiences when I pass it over to her. So I'm going to ask Beth to get ready and get your PowerPoint ready, and I will unmute you if I can figure that out. And all right. Hi, Beth. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much.
All right, and let me just hand over the controls to you. All right. So whenever you're ready, Beth, you can get started and introduce what you have.
All right, I think it's calling it up here.
Okay.
You see everything well?
Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Great.
Well, Maggie, thank you so much. And, for everybody participating, it really is a privilege to be with you today. I think, it's a very unique time to be talking with you, to be talking about this subject in particular, so close to the 10th anniversary of September 11th. It is a historic time in our nation's history. I would like to, this is something from, for those of you who saw some of the footage coming from, Ground Zero and the new memorial, the public memorial that's there. This is a picture from that. I want to share a little something as we get started. I had the opportunity to be in Ground Zero this past, at Ground Zero this past weekend, and I was part of this Beyond the Bike. The two women who are featured in the film, they started the organization Beyond the 11th, and one of their primary fundraising mechanisms is through this ride that they've done now multiple times from Ground Zero back to Boston, where they're from. And, the first time I met them, they were this was in 2004, and they were just about to make their first ride. And, I participated from, we were hanging out the back of a minivan. I was, holding a shotgun microphone, trying not to, knock them off as we were filming. And it was really such an honor and a thrill to participate this year as a rider. And it's a 270-mile bike ride that I did with about 50 other people to support the women, to support the organization. And, it was, what made it so incredible was to be with all of the other people who had also made the choice to do this ride. I mean, we really shared a very powerful sense of purpose. We wanted to remember September 11th in a way that connects us to each other and connects us to our world. And I had to say, when I think about it, that's what I hope happens when people watch the film. That's my dream, that when you watch the film, you have a sense of connection to others and to our world in a way that maybe you didn't have before. It's also the reason that I want to make films. Is to create change. I apologize. See, now I've missed all these pictures. Let me just stop here for one moment. We had a very sad thing. It doesn't seem sad with those smiles on our faces here, but this is Susan Retik on the right, who sustained a fall on the second day of the ride. And, I think all of us, all of the riders wish that it had been us instead. She fell off the bike and broke her collarbone and sustained a concussion. She's doing great, but it was very sad to have her not be able to participate in the ride, and a great disappointment to her, of course. The reason that I want to make films is to create change, and of course you don't have to make films to do that, but there is an opportunity here if that's the goal. And I believe that documentary filmmaking is one of the most powerful devices for nonfiction storytelling. And I've always liked the definition of a documentary as the creative treatment of actuality. This idea that cinema really has the potential to observe life in a better way than nonfiction in terms of its ability to interpret our world. I know we have some students in our audience here, and I'd like to, I just, as I was preparing this, just thinking back, to sitting in the high school classroom, and just feeling like, small girl with just big ideas about, again, anything and everything. And after college, it was, these kind of big ideas that put me on the road to my career as a documentary filmmaker. Before starting to do documentaries, I was a journalist and a news anchor, news reporter, and I just had this sense, with every passing day that I was delivering the news in these 60-second increments, it just drove me completely, crazy, thinking about how much of every story had to be left behind to fit into such a small time segment. I was asking, how could we ever really understand what's going on when we only see and only hear such a small and tiny slice? And so when I founded Principal Pictures, I really did it so that I could tell more of the stories that matter to me, more of, who, more why, more, what happens next. And the subjects that my company chooses, that I choose, are ones that are really closest to my heart. They're stories that I hope give a voice to people who are seldom heard. That's my goal. They're subjects to raise social awareness, and that circle back really time and time again to the critical, perpetual, absolutely priceless value of seeing others in ourselves and seeing ourselves in others. And I want to allow others to see ourselves in them. Now, to do this, as you saw from Beyond Belief, it takes, you said there's a lot of travel involved, and we go to some very remote and very troubled places in the world, often multiple times, to tell, for one film. Most recently we've traveled to Afghanistan, and here we are in Cairo. This was one of my colleagues. It was his birthday, so we went to see the pyramids on horseback. That was one of a fun time. We've been in Iraq recently, Kosovo, Burma, Southern Sudan, Uganda, and really, almost every kind of unnerving thing that you could think might happen to you on a trip, it happens. We've been detained by immigration officials, had our cars swept before contraband by men with machine guns, stayed in rat and cockroach infested rooms in places with no running water or electricity, places where you'd probably give your life savings just to have a mosquito net. But the rough road to these places is, and the enduring those kinds of hardships is just such a small price to pay, to get to know some of these really remarkable people that I've met along the way. You might remember Sahara Nazmia from Beyond Belief. Here she is holding a picture. She's a widow, and this is her husband. It's the only picture that she has. When the Taliban came to power, you were not allowed to have pictures, and so people burned all of their personal pictures, and she hid this one away so that she would have would have a picture of her husband. And quite frankly, she was lucky not to be caught with it. She, these men, women, children who really met along the way, they themselves, they have big, huge, and wild ideas about things like seeing stability in their country, making peace with their enemies. Something that seems simple to us, being able to say what they think and wear what they want, providing food, shelter, and schooling for themselves and their children, or just truly in some way making life easier for someone who drew the proverbial short straw in terms of wealth, gender status, or all of the above. And the people that I've met doing the filming, the subjects of my documentaries, have taught me so much about big ideas, and most of all the fact that it's small steps, it's small choices that help us all to evolve from what we believe into what we do and who we are. And I think when I look back at my own experience as a student, I think I saw my role really as a passive one, and it's really easy to do. It's very logical, as a teenager to sit there and you think of yourself as a beginner, as an apprentice, as a work in progress, and you are. I think we all are. But if there's one thing that journalism has taught me, it's really never to underestimate, it's how much I still don't know. But even though we do all have so much to learn, I think we also have much to do. And, no matter what our age, we are old enough and, wise enough when we're young, strong enough when we're young to make a difference if we choose to. Because doing something worthwhile is really almost never, a one-off event. It's, you're deciding that something matters to you, and then you're following that feeling into an action. That's the first action, but then there's another and another action. To really, appreciate the power that an individual does have, I think, for me, I look no further than the two women who are featured in Beyond Belief. Susan Retik, who's on the left here in the picture, and Patti Quigley on the right. They are two of the most amazing people I know. They taught me about big ideas, important choices, and about the small steps that really, seemingly against all odds, can reverberate to the far corners of our world. When Susan and Patti's husbands were killed on September 11th, they had a choice. They very easily could have shut out the world. They could have shunned anything and everything that was different than them. I mean, think about it. Afghanistan is the country where the terrorists trained to kill their husbands. This is the land that made their children fatherless. And Afghanistan, I mean, it's about as different a place from America as you can imagine, especially when you think about the life of an Afghan widow and her children. But when you see the differences in people, it is so easy to be indifferent to them, indifferent to their plight, indifferent to their need. Instead, Susan and Patti chose to focus on what is similar about themselves and the women of Afghanistan. And there are similarities for sure. I mean, when we were there, it's interesting. When we first started filming, the trajectory of the film was very clear to me. Susan and Patti from the beginning expressed not just a desire to go to Afghanistan to meet the women, but a real need to go. And they talked to me about this kinship that they felt. They felt this real connection with these war widows in Afghanistan, who were suffering because of the same tragedy, and that they were the same terrorists who affected Susan and Patti. Susan and Patti looked across the pond here and said, wait a minute, these women are affected by the same terrorists, but who's helping them? And I just thought, wow, that's really incredible that they feel this connection with these women. And I struggled to understand it. I mean, I got that they felt it, but I thought, I really wonder if when they meet the women and they're there with them face to face, are they going to feel that? And even if they do continue to feel it, is that something that we could ever capture on film? So, they couldn't geographically, they couldn't come from more different backgrounds. They don't speak the same language. Economically, they come from completely different backgrounds. I mean, they are about as different as you can imagine. I can only tell you that, being in the room and watching them talk to each other and speak this common language of womanhood, motherhood, widowhood, I mean, that was their language, and it was beautiful, and it was this palpable connection that we all felt. And so there are these similarities, and it's a choice to focus on them. And there, just like there are similarities between Susan and Patti and the women that they met, there are similarities between, American high school kids and Afghan teenagers. So, when you think about what happened in the months that followed the attacks, both Susan and Patti were completely consumed. I mean, they were both pregnant on 9/11. They already had children, and you can imagine how, consumed they would be with just holding it together, holding themselves together, holding their families together. They very quickly, after 9/11, had newborn babies, and they were grieving. Their children are grieving. They're just overwhelmed by the enormity of what happened to them. But each of them, they also had a hard time coming to terms with the fact that the 9/11 attacks would ultimately result in more widows, more fatherless children, at this time in Afghanistan. And they did a little research, and they realized that being a widow in Afghanistan is a truly terrible fate. Widows become the property of the husband's families. They have no income. They're not allowed to work outside the home. If they want to remarry, they are often forced to abandon their children to their in-laws. They're told they can't take their children with them. It's an unconscionable choice. So now the two American women, they didn't know each other on 9/11, became friends with each other afterward because of their very similar circumstances. And their circumstances extended, this is, extended beyond the fact that they were both pregnant on 9/11. It extended to the outpouring of love and support they received from their own families, from their community, from people who didn't know them. People from around the world got in touch with Susan and Patti. There were people who knocked on their door every night and gave them dinner, strangers, left things. People sent homemade quilts. There was just this incredible outpouring of support. They realized that this never happens to an Afghan widow. The life of an Afghan widow for them was horrifying to even imagine. And I thought, this is really the point at which the story might end. You read about the fate of someone so far away, and you just shake your head and and lament it and think, gosh, what could I possibly do? But instead, Susan and Patti chose to help. They started with just all they wanted to do was connect each with one widow. They thought, we'll use a little bit of our own money, and they used that money to create a foundation to help widows in Afghanistan. And then they started fundraising. So, that first step. First was the decision to do something, and then, one step, and then the next. And so they were fundraising, and they sought help and advice on everything from, how do you go about setting up a foundation, to what on earth could possibly be done to help women who are so completely disregarded by their own society. So the foundation at the very beginning began giving Afghan widows really the most basic tools to begin supporting themselves: chickens in a coop, a cow and a calf, training and supplies for sewing or to start a bakery business. And one thing, beyond the 11th, they're not interested in teaching women a skill that can't sustain itself. So let's say they have a program that is teaching women to weave carpets. That's great. The women can weave a carpet. But what happens to that carpet? If there's no mechanism for selling that carpet and creating, generating an income for the women long term, this organization will not support it, which I think it's a fantastic model. So the women who participate in this program, and since they started the organization about 8 years ago, they've now helped over 10,000 women become self-sufficient or be put on the path to self-sufficiency. So often, in terms of what we're used to in terms of salary, you may not think that the money that these enterprises make provides much, but it does provide a measure of independence, and most importantly, it allows many of the families to send their children to school, and that more than anything is shown to help to break this really incredible, heartbreaking cycle of poverty. So I did travel to Afghanistan with Susan and Patti and filmed them as they met the widows that they were helping. And as I said, seeing them together, it's kind of like meeting old friends. And we realized that I spoke about this common language of motherhood, widowhood, and womanhood, but even a little bit beyond that, the realization that we all have the same basis for our big ideas. We want security, we want health and happiness, and we want education. And I'll never forget Susan saying while we were there, our core values are the same. And I think beyond the 11th, the organization that Susan and Patti started is really, it's a powerful reminder that in addition to wanting those things for ourselves, we also have the power to help others achieve them. And it may not feel like it, every day, getting on the bus or walking to the classroom, that it's a privilege to be, to have the opportunity for education. But, what I've seen in every single place I've been is that this education is the goal of individuals and families and whole communities, even when it seems completely out of their reach. So, so many of the mothers that I met, they are illiterate, they're poor beyond imagination. They dream of education for their children. We've met fathers who, they move from place to place. They're trying to earn enough money to support their families, and they want to get that money home, and they see educating their kids as the ultimate goal. And we've been doing some new filming in Afghanistan at an all-girls school in a very conservative village. It's the first all-girls school in this village. And every day that we're filming there, we see these small girls and then boys going to the boys' school, and we just see them racing to their dirt floor schools every morning just to try to capture as much knowledge as they possibly can. I'd like to wrap up my presentation with the quote that I used at the end of the film, at the end of Beyond Belief. It has been an incredible inspiration to me, and I hope that when you saw the film that it resonated with you as well. It was said by Patti's brother: "There's a way in which each of us makes small choices every day, and after a period of time, those choices develop into a pattern, and we might be thought of as choosing ourselves, so that each moral or ethical choice forms our identity. We choose our way into being ourselves in little choices and in big choices. Who you will become is who you've chosen to be." So as the school year, gets started, and, here we are, just days away from the 10th anniversary of September 11th, I just hope that watching the film and talking today is maybe a reminder that, the little things, volunteering an hour or an afternoon or a weekend of your time, or opening your mind to a concept that's difficult for you, maybe setting a goal you have to struggle for, going out of your way to help someone who needs a hand, that those are the steps to the future and to becoming the person you want to be, and to realizing your own big dreams and your own big ideas through these small, everyday choices.
Right. Thank you so much, Beth, for those.
Well, you're welcome, and I'd love to. I know we have. I don't know if we have questions coming in already, but I would be happy to, answer any questions people have.
Let me put up your picture.
Oh, yes.
There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is open it up for questions. If you have access to a microphone and would like to speak your question, you can raise your hand, and I will unmute you for the question, and then we'll have Beth answer the question. Or you can type your question into the questions box, and we will read them to Beth. We'll take as many as we have time for. So please submit your questions now, or raise your hand. The hand raise button is on the side of the control panel. You can put your hand up there. Anyone want to raise their hand? Speak a question out loud? All right, I'm going to ask the first question, Beth, so hopefully you're there. The question I have is, let me mute you for a second, and then I'll ask my question. You originally were in Afghanistan for the filming for Beyond Belief several years ago, and it sounds like you've been back since then. Can you talk about any changes you saw in the country when you returned?
Sure. In fact, the first time that I was there was in late 2001, early 2002, and I was filming, and the project that I was filming for never came to fruition. And I had this kind of nagging sense of wanting to go back to Afghanistan and tell a story that focused on women, because when we had been there in late 2001, the Taliban had just fallen, and we heard all these reports of women were throwing off their burqas, and women were free, and wasn't this fantastic? And I didn't see any of that. When every woman that I saw when I was there in late 2001, early 2002, every woman was wearing a burqa. And I thought, well, maybe it's just because I'm not in the city. We weren't in Kabul, and we were kind of in the northern areas on the border with Turkmenistan. And so I thought, well, maybe that's the reason. Well, fast forward to 2006 when we traveled there with Susan and Patti, and we were in the capital. So here it was 5 years later, and the majority of the women that we saw were still covered head to toe. With the burqa. I've been back since. It was really exciting to go back. I was back in 2009, and I was able to I recorded a message from Susan to Sahara, one of the main Afghan women that we spent time with, and it was incredible because we had spoken, at length with Sahara about, her family and her reasons for, wearing the burqa. And we had arrived at the location where we were meeting first, and she and her sister-in-law, when they arrived, I was looking out the window, and it was incredible. They weren't wearing the burqa. And so, of course, they walked in. That was my first question, what happened? And in fact, their mother-in-law had passed away, and she was the driving force in keeping them behind the burqa. And so that was kind of a really incredible change in their lives. And I also was able to record a message from Sahara back to Susan and Patti, and since then we've set up, Sahara now has a cell phone, and thanks to the support that she's received through Beyond the 11th, her son is in college, and he's actually studying English, and they're hoping that he gets good enough so that he could be a translator between all of them. So that's been, she's been the woman that we've stayed in closest contact with, and it was really a thrill to find her again and be able to talk with her and have this kind of ongoing relationship.
Great, thank you. You answered my other question about following up on Sahara's story, so thank you for doing that. We have a few questions that have come in. Let's see. One from Talia. The question is, how did you come across this story, and why was it important for you to share it?
So thank you for this question. I'm on the board of a nonprofit in Boston. It's the International Institute of New England, and we do a lot of work with immigrants and refugees, and I'd become through this work pretty close to the Afghan community in the Boston area. And when Susan and Patti were doing their first bike ride from Ground Zero back to Boston, I don't show it in the film, but when they came into Massachusetts, they picked up another almost 200 riders, each person representing someone from New England who had been killed on September 11th. And a fellow board member of mine was one of those 200 riders. And she just emailed me the link to the organization and said, I think you'd be interested in this, because we both had worked pretty extensively with the local Afghan population. And I got her email. I clicked on it. Within 5 minutes, I was dialing information. I had Susan on the phone and started talking with her. And it was, it was funny at the beginning because Susan's reaction was, "Are you crazy? Who on earth would be interested in the film about what we're doing? That's just crazy. No one's going to be interested." And I really had that sense of beyond belief when I heard about what they were doing, and even more so when I met them. I mean, it seemed so clear to me that it was such an unlikely thing to do, and that for us to be able to bear witness to how they were responding to September 11th was such a valuable lesson in the context of what was happening on a national level and at the political level. And so that was, I mean, that was the beginning.
Great, thank you. We have Greg, who is with a group of 8 students and himself, and I'm just going to read the question. It's a little bit long, so I'll try to read it clearly. My question relates to a recent NPR report I heard about Afghan kids. The report stated that few children know why U.S. citizens or soldiers came to Afghanistan, but they now see us as supporters of rebuilding schools, hospitals, etc. What was the impression of Americans that you got from the Afghan widows you filmed? Are there women who do not want help from Americans?
So, I mean, it is a complicated question, and I want to say one thing before I get to the widows themselves. I'll never forget, we were driving with our, it was just the crew, and the driver was also our kind of, fixer and translator at that moment, and we were passing by this, big brown, brownstone kind of, wall, and spray painted on it were the letters USA, and he was just kind of chuckling. He was like pointing at it and chuckling. It just seemed kind of odd. And so what's I'm looking at the USA? I'm looking at him. Like, what's so funny? And he said, USA, United States of Afghanistan. And there's a people feel many things. The women that we met were very grateful and had a sense of, expressed feeling like Susan and Patti were sisters and really, understood, what they needed. But there can be repercussions for people who have an association with America and Americans, not, negative repercussions. And so, for example, when we met up with Sahara again, I mean, she really wanted to meet with us, but she didn't want to do it in her home because she was, in a home with many other families. And when you have an association, especially a personal association, the assumption is made that the Americans are giving you money. And so that could, the negative consequences of that can be multiple. So you could be attacked for people to try to steal the money. They could have their rent raised after we leave. So although they wanted to have an association, and in most cases invited us into their homes, there were occasions when that that was not possible, and it was seen to be would have been harmful to the women to have been associating with us. When it comes to the help itself, I did not meet one woman who was not very grateful for the opportunity to participate in these programs. That said, we also had the realization that, I was specifically going to talk to women who are in programs. So, that was that was the circle of women in which I was traveling. So, you could expect that would be more likely what we would be hearing, and maybe those sentiments are out there, but we just didn't really have access to them. I don't know.
Can you talk a little bit more? This question is also from Talia. I think maybe she's with the group. Did you run into any kind of difficulties while you were in Afghanistan?
Well, yes. I mean, there are, you kind of feel like trouble is waiting for you around every corner, and that is the precariousness of the society is something you feel, every second that you're there. One of the, I'll give you a few examples. We were visiting widows in their homes, and we were walking through some villages, and there was a man on a motorbike who was zipping around and, asking a lot of questions. I don't know exactly what his story was, but, this motorbike, it's kind of a telltale, Taliban thing. It's often, the Taliban will often give new recruits a motorbike, and, it has been known to happen that when someone comes around and is asking a lot of questions like this, they get their answers, they leave, and they bring back, they bring back others with them. So we were in the beginning of what could have become a situation like that, we felt, and, recognized it fairly quickly and got out of the area as quickly as we could. We got into a car accident when we were there, and it was just, within what felt like milliseconds, we went from what seemed like a completely normal situation on the streets of Kabul to being, surrounded by a mass of, angry men pushing. The screaming started as the police arrived. We started to feel less safe than we did before they arrived. And quite frankly, I was, nervous for us, but, even more than that, I couldn't even really think about myself or my crew at that moment because I was so concerned about Susan and Patti's safety. And so we, ushered them into a taxi to go back to the guest house as quickly as we could, got them back, and then, got a cab for ourselves. The day Susan and Patti were there for 8 days. After they left, we stayed on. I wanted to try to keep their experience in Afghanistan as, as pristine as possible. It's hard when you have a camera crew. There were only 2 of us, but still, the reality is we're there. But we tried to, step back as they were meeting the women and let them have as pure an experience as possible with the women they were meeting. When they left, we stayed on, and that's when we went back and we interviewed the women multiple times, spent time with them in their homes, and did all of that other work. And so we stayed on longer. The day after we left, there was a car accident in Kabul in which a U.S. military vehicle, we were told, they lost its brakes, gave out. It came down a hill at a stoplight, couldn't stop, and smashed into a line of cars, and there were some locals who were killed. It sparked the biggest riots that had happened in Afghanistan since the U.S. invasion, and the CARE International, which is an organization that we spent a lot of time with. We were at their offices every single day that we were there. The CARE International offices were burned to the ground. The guest house where we had been staying just the day before was shot up. It was just, that's how fast things can happen. And that's so that you're, it just, the precarious is the best word I can use to describe how you feel when you're there, that the society, what's happening in society can deteriorate so fast at any given moment. And I think, we're seeing now with these attacks on the U.S. Embassy, it's just, another example of the kinds of things that are happening there all the time.
Thanks. And this is a related question from another student. Were there any special precautions you had to take as a female in Afghanistan?
Well, we had I never did wear a burqa, and it wasn't recommended, but a lot of people do, a lot of Westerners do choose to do that. We tried to follow what the Western aid organizations were doing. So, for their staff, what they recommend is, you have to wear a headscarf. That's just, that's out of respect in a Muslim society, and just very kind of, big, baggy clothing. So, saying you do not want your wrists exposed, so you really want your sleeves to go down, midway down your fingers. They must, the best kind of covering is a very loose kind of dress or top that goes all the way down, to the ankles, and then also be wearing, pants or a longer dress underneath. So that's, the idea is you want to try to blend in as much as possible. The reality is there's a limit to how much you can actually blend in. I wasn't under any illusion that I was, blending. I always had my hair, pulled back very, very tight and up. So that's, those were really, as a woman, those are the kind of best things that you can do traveling in society. We also had, there was a curfew that the Western aid organizations followed. You're never out after dark. You're never walking the street alone. I mean, that might seem like an obvious thing, but life in Afghanistan, it pretty much happens when you're a Westerner. It kind of happens behind gates. The guest house where we stayed, and when we went back, we stayed in someone's private home. But these are, really gated areas, and so you have got the car, and you get out of the house or the guest house, and you get in the car, you go out of the gate, then you go into another gate, the gate closes, and that's when you get out. So there's not, that kind of, freedom in society where, oh, let's, hey, there's a restaurant down the street, let's walk from the guest house to the restaurant. I mean, that would never happen.
Great. Another question from a student is, do you have a personal connection with 9/11 as Susan and Patti did?
Not to that degree. I mean, I think, I think we all have a personal connection. I had a couple of high school classmates who were killed in the towers. They were both working in the towers at different companies. That's my, my closest connection. It was interesting. We did a professional development workshop with teachers a couple of months ago, and we spent the first part of the session talking about, that was the kind of the warm-up question was, tell us about, what was your experience on 9/11? What were you doing that day? What do you remember? And it was such a strange thing for me. I thought, and the first thing I said was, I've just never really felt like I have a right to talk about my experiences of 9/11. What do I have to, say? And it wasn't, and it was, really, in talking about it, and I remember, my sense from that day was just this overwhelming sense of just wanting to be with family and really thinking for the first time about an emergency plan. Like, wow, I'm in Massachusetts. I live on Cape Cod. Most of my family lives in Connecticut. We're about 2.5, up to 3 hours away from each other. If there were, if attacks continued to happen, if we were in, this emergency situation, could we get to each other? What would happen? What would that emergency plan look like? What would we do? What kind of supplies would we need? But it's such I don't know. I had a hard time thinking that I should, talk about my own experiences of 9/11, and so it was very interesting to be in that group of others who had really, similar experiences to mine. I think most people, that is the experience of just that overwhelming sense of like our whole world has changed. How and coming to terms with that, and so it's I think it's very personal for every American.
Thanks. And I think for students who may have been quite young, that your film actually really helps personalize the event. That it's something that it's difficult to understand, if you were very young. But so I think I want to say that your film was helpful for that. Another question that I had was you mentioned that it's that Patti and Susan are sort of an example of the power of the individual. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for student activities or places or ways to get involved for students?
Let me give you a minute, because I think that I really think this kind of, it runs the gamut. I would love it if people watch this and said, you know what, I would like to do something specifically to help, beyond the 11th, specifically to raise awareness about the organization, about the plight of widows and children in Afghanistan. So that could, I might encourage people to, hold a fundraiser, screening. It doesn't have to be a fundraiser. It could be a screening of the film, and that can be the raising of awareness. But we're a fundraiser for the organization. That would be wonderful. Maybe it's a bake sale. Maybe it's maybe it's putting together a screening and a small panel discussion with some experts from your community. It can even be it could be faith-based if people were interested in that. We don't make a big deal of it in the film, but Susan's Jewish, Patti's Catholic, and the women are Muslim, and so there's a very I think a unique opportunity to explore those issues as well, if that's of interest to people. So that's very specific to Afghanistan and the film. But the reality is, I would love it if it helps to inspire just thinking about what's important to you, and then making a choice to focus on that thing and take a step toward something that goes beyond yourself, and if it goes also beyond the community, beyond our borders, into the greater world, then absolutely wonderful. I think that there are so many opportunities, and I think that's where a lot of us, where you get tripped up. There's so many things that can be done that not much can get accomplished sometimes, and it's that that willingness to make the decision first and then stick with it and continue on that path. And I'll give you, one of the most extraordinary things I think that's come out of this is Susan's son. His name is Ben. So you saw in the film that Susan's husband, Dave, was quite a soccer player. He played in college at Colgate. Well, his son, Ben, who's now entering high school, is also an awesome soccer player. And he and his friends got together, and they started an organization themselves. Now, it's an outgrowth of something new that Susan is supporting. Again, you don't see this in the film. It's a relatively new program within the past, less than a year. But these women, they're training women in Afghanistan to make soccer balls. And what Ben's organization does, Ben is a freshman in high school, his organization buys the soccer balls that are being made by Afghan widows, and they then distribute those soccer balls in Haiti, to kids in Haiti. And that's happening. That's real. And this is, someone in the, the age group that, we're talking about, making a decision, making the connections, and, seeing it through and just taking a small step. At first they're going to buy, 20 soccer balls. Then it's 50. And the next thing you know, they've distributed, 2,500, 5,000 soccer balls to kids in Haiti. And I think that's extraordinary and such a testament to what Susan and Patti are teaching, first to their own children and then to the rest of us.
Great. Thank you. And I believe Liz has posted in the chat for everyone to see a link to the Beyond the 11th website. So that's beyondthe11th.org, and then also a link to a resource guide that Primary Source put together with books and films and other websites as well. But and also your website, Beth, is principalpictures.org. Is that right?
.com. It's principalpictures.com. Yep, and you can get to the Beyond Belief website by either going to the main website, or it's principalpictures.com/beyond-belief.
Great. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. I'm going to ask a question for Susanna. She asked, could you tell us a little bit more about Patti's current organization and what its goals are in Afghanistan?
Absolutely. So Patti is the executive director of Razia's Ray of Hope Foundation, and that foundation runs an all-girls school, the Zabuli School. And the Zabuli School is in the village of Day Subs, which is about 8 miles, north of Kabul. But it's 8 miles, but it takes about an hour, to get there. And that's the school at which we've been filming. The new film is called What Tomorrow Brings. And as I mentioned, it's a unique setting for an all-girls school because it is such a conservative village. It's actually in quite a little Taliban enclave, and yet the school is not just there, but it's thriving. It's across the street from madrasa. And so our vision for the film is that we're filming with the girls at the school, and then also with focusing primarily on one girl at the school, and then her brother who is at the madrasa, and really hoping to provide a very intimate portrait of Afghan village life through this family and their experiences. So Patti is really, she's focused on education. That is what she's focused on. And there have been a number of studies done. It's one of the UN Millennium Goals to educate girls in developing countries. It is really seen as the #1 way to fight poverty, fight extremism. And so, again, I mean, that's, when it comes to thinking about, Susan and Patti were affected by terrorism. So when you look at their, kind of large, their mission ultimately is what can be done in our world to help to stop future acts of terrorism. And that's the basis for their work. And and so they're now, even though they're working on different things now, they both have the same goal. And certainly, what Patti's doing is definitely, I really believe in that, and I believe it's a way to achieve exactly that.
Great, thank you. I want to thank everyone for your great questions. We didn't get a chance to get to all of them, but I want to say that the film was very inspiring, and also being able to hear from you, Beth. Thank you for joining us. I want to invite anyone who's in the Boston area to join us next week on Wednesday, the 21st, at Boston College for a screening of Beyond Belief, and also a panel discussion with Beth and Patti, who's in the film, and also Professor Ali Banu-Azizi from Boston College. Everyone is invited to that. You can find more information on our website. And we do invite you to stay in touch. We are on Facebook and Twitter, and also on YouTube. We do have a brief 3-question survey that will come up when you exit the webinar, and so I want to thank you for that. And we will send the recording next week. Beth, do you want to say any closing remarks before we go?
Well, thank you so much. I'm really in awe of Primary Source and your mission, and, I'm so happy that we found this, synergy and that we were able to do this. And for everyone who's participating, I thank you so much for doing so, being interested in the film and in the themes that are contained within it. I would encourage you, if you're interested in, other materials, there is a standards-based study and action guide that is it was written by Columbia University Teachers College. It can be downloaded from my website, and it's applicable for students. It was written for students grades 7 through 16, and so you'll find things within there that I think could prove very useful for for generating discussion. So it's principalpictures.com, and so if you're interested in downloading that, you can go to the website and do so.
Great, thank you, Beth, for providing all those resources and for sharing the film with us and with students and teachers across the country. So thank you all for joining us. If you do have any questions or want to follow up, my email address is Maggie, M-A-G-G-I-E, @primarysource.org, or you can visit our website or find us on social media. So until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.